This is the death knell for all those memes about GML not being a real programming language. If you've paid any attention at all to social media in the last week or so, you've probably noticed a few people talking about a big fat GML update that Yo-Yo Games announced. So if you have a background in other programming languages, you probably know what most of the things on this list mean, and if you don't, I'm going to tell you what they mean in the least professional way possible, because they're all wonderful. There's a big, huge asterisk on that I'll be getting to in a minute. So if you want to read the blog post where all this was announced yourself, the link is in the video description, I hope, and I know a bunch of other people have already done coverage on this. In particular, Sean Spalding and Lazy Eye went pretty deep into it. So if you're into this sort of thing, I do encourage you to go and look into it further, and see if there are maybe other applications for these things that I haven't even thought of yet. And this can be either a good thing or a bad thing depending on how you look at it, but about a half hour before I sat down to record this, Yo-Yo Games posted an FAQ on their website that was in response to an Ask Me Anything thread that they did in their forums about this. And it's really long, and I haven't gotten to read all of it as of my recording this because screw research. So all told, this just gives me an excuse to make this video as unprofessional as I possibly can. Number 1, chained accessors. This first one is really just quality of life. Imagine you have a list of lists of lists, or a list of maps of lists, or a list of arrays, or something like that. If you're familiar with JSON, which is JavaScript object notation, which is a way that you can store information, you'll know exactly what I have in mind. And if you're not familiar with JSON, yes, lists of lists of lists are the kinds of things that really do happen sometimes. So up to this point, if you have a data structure organized like this, and you want to access one of the elements inside it, the code that you'll have to write to do that will look like something awful like this. Alternatively, you could also do it in a bunch of nested DSList find value calls, and to be perfectly honest, that really looks even worse. We won't have to do that soon, and by soon I mean Q4 2019, which is basically forever in internet terms. Other programming languages would just let you chain the accessors together, like this, and soon enough we're going to be allowed to do that in GameMaker language as well. It's pretty cool. Oh, speaking of arrays, did you ever want to have an array with more than 2 dimensions? Some of you probably have, and most of you who have probably had to jump through a lot of hoops to get around the annoying little 2-dimensional array restriction. That's also not going to be the case anymore, which you could either see as a good thing because it means less work in the future, or a bad thing because why the crap wasn't this a feature when they added accessors to GameMaker language in the first place like 5 years ago? Better late than never, I guess. Number 2, object methods. Boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, is this one of the things that I have really wanted in GameMaker language for a long time. If you've used other object-oriented programming languages like Java or C# or Python, in which case I'm sorry that you ever had to use Python, you'll know exactly what this is. Currently, you can fake object methods by taking advantage of the fact that script resources are actually just indices which can be passed around and executed using script execute. But it's not a perfect solution because at the end of the day, scripts, like all resources in GameMaker, are global in scope, and if you call a script from an object that it isn't intended to call it, bad things will happen. Dog, I am trying to record things, and you are making noise with your collar and dog tags. I don't know why she wants to be in the room with me when I'm screaming at my computer. Technically, GML is still going to call them functions, but I think object-oriented is the greatest thing since, like, video games. So I'm going to call them methods in this video.
Hey.
So unlike scripts, their use is restricted to the object that owns them, which means that GML is basically almost not quite really close to being an object-oriented programming language now. If any of you watching this are familiar with JavaScript, GML officially basically wants to just be JavaScript when it grows up. I'm not sure if it's a good idea for me to completely go over a rundown of what object-oriented is right now and how it differs from what GML is currently. But I will say that everything that is going to be possible after this update in terms of the kinds of games that can be made will be possible before this update. It's just going to be a lot easier to organize things in big projects and even in small projects, and the code quality has the potential to be a lot cleaner. And you won't have to worry about accidentally spilling your data all over the place and start throwing variable not found errors all over the place potentially. And if I'm allowed to get my hopes up just a little bit too much, it might even just encourage people to write cleaner code from the beginning, because you now don't have to worry about having a bazillion different scripts floating around all over the place that are global in scope. Yeah, I have those. Hey, anyone want to take a challenge and see if they can just make an entire game without using any script resources and just using object methods? Oh, and one more thing on these, by the way. You know how currently you have to do the annoying argument 0, argument 1, argument 2 thing every time you pass an argument to a script? Well, not anymore! Thank you, Yo-Yo! It is a really good thing I am recording this when nobody else is home. 3. Multiple function definitions in a single script file or code file. Another nice side effect of the last thing, where you get to just declare a function using the function keyword, is that if you create a named function, which is an option as well, it will be globally accessible and usable just like a script. And you will be able to define as many of these as you want in a single script file, or I presume anywhere else, like in object event or creation code or something. I don't know why you would want to do that. So if you have a bunch of math-related functions that are only a couple lines long, or some other type of convenience scripts that you now have, you don't need 15 separate script resources for every single one of them. Pretty nice, huh? Number 4, lightweight objects. This is going to get way more confusing than Yo-Yo Games probably needed to make it, but I'll get to that in a bit. In the past, if you've ever asked me to name a single feature in GML that I wanted to see and thought was never going to happen, yes, even more than object methods, I would probably have said something like a lightweight object before the words even finished coming out of your mouth. And from what I've seen by hanging around the programming nerds and the game maker community, I'm definitely not alone on that. There's a bunch of reasons to be excited about this. In their video, Lazy Eye and Sean Spalding look at it from the perspective of JavaScript, and since I'm now committed to using the joke of Gmail wanting to be JavaScript when it grows up, I guess that's a metaphor that I'm going to use from now until I die. As someone who likes the whole role-playing game genre and likes to have a way to store a large amount of things like game data, representing items and enemy templates and whatever, I've attacked the problem of if you use a normal GameMaker objects just to store data, their step events are still going to be fired and slow the game down even if they're not actually doing anything, among other things, in a few different ways. And all my solutions are various flavors of bad. And I'm not going to get into any of those right now, because all those workarounds just go out the window, because we now get to just create blobs of data that don't do anything other than exist. Or no more messing around with instance deactivation, or no more bloated DS maps, or no more built-in variables for things like sprite index and image angle that don't do anything for us except take up space. And to make things even better, you can even attach functions to these, and apparently, which I was wondering about and almost missed the first 3 times I read the initial blog post, static variables and lightweight objects are even going to exist, apparently. Now, what's the confusing part that I mentioned a little while ago? Number 5, the new keyword. My entire life is a lie. The lightweight objects are just basically a prettier looking DS map. And functions are actually the lightweight objects. What the hell, Yo-Yo? So if you know other object-oriented languages, you probably know that you can use the new operator keyword thing to create an instance of a class, which is almost what it does here. Except you don't call it on what they are calling a lightweight object type, you call it on what they call a function. The example that they used in the blog was to create a vector type, complete with the XYZ coordinates, and an add function to do math with another vector type. And instead of returning a value, the function returns itself, and you can access the XYZ and add thingies with the dot operator. Functions are lightweight objects. It had one job, Yo-Yo, it had one job. Ow! This is my emotional support rabbit, and he's going to help me get through the rest of Yo-Yo's incompetence. So anyway, despite Yo-Yo's best efforts to fumble this one, we now have lightweight object types, and object methods, and even static variables. Which, about 3 weeks ago, I would have been like, haha, static variables in GameMaker, you must be new here. And I think it's about time to move on. Number 6, exception handling. Exception handling is probably one of the least glamorous things that you'll ever do in programming, but it's still pretty cool, so let's talk about it. They didn't post any specific examples of this, although maybe in the FAQ that I haven't read yet, they have gone into more detail. But I have to imagine that it's going to work like exception handling in most/all other programming languages. Classic examples would be math errors, perhaps you try to divide by or take the log of 0 and you don't want to do this whole ordeal. Or more urgently, maybe you want to read from a buffer that is out of bounds and you don't have to want to do this whole ordeal. Or maybe you want to try and parse a data structure string and you don't know if it's corrupted or not. Or maybe even you want to try and convert a string to a number and don't want the game to explode if you give it an invalid input, which means, holy cow, I don't need to use regex for this anymore. Yo-Yo, your sins are forgiven!
Hey.
With that in mind, it's not going to be possible to address all the problems that might happen. Things like syntax errors or compiler errors, or other things that might prevent the game from running in the first place, obviously will not be caught by exception handling. Or things that are beyond the control of GameMaker, like operating system errors, or God forbid a computer malfunction, or more probably if you run out of RAM. Because, yeah, I may or may not have done that a few times. And then there are some things that you just can't try catch, like an infinite loop, because in cases like that, the game doesn't have any way of knowing that's not what you wanted.
Hey.
But try-catch is going to be exceedingly helpful in a lot of situations, particularly when dealing with, I think, files and buffers like I mentioned a little while ago. The God of GameMaker extensions, Yellow Afterlife, made a similar thing a while ago as an extension, and it's pretty cool. but it's also pretty cool to have it just built into GameMaker in the first place. Number 7, the garbage collector. This could be very good or very, very bad. If you've used a language that isn't C or C++ before, you've probably taken advantage of a garbage collector, even if you've never heard it mentioned by name. It's just a clunky sound of way of saying that you don't have to dereference all of your variables whenever you're done using them and worry about getting a memory leak. If you look for long enough, you can probably find some place where GameMaker already does this, like maybe when a variable goes out of scope.
Hey.
You don't have to manually free its memory, although that's usually not what garbage collection refers to. But at the same time, variables in GameMaker are not actually just primitive types, but it's a big mess, never mind. Point is, for the most part, GameMaker doesn't do this. If you create an object or a data structure or a surface or a particle system or anything else that returns an index, you need to remember to delete it when you're done. Otherwise, it will just sit there in memory forever and bad things will happen if you don't clean them up. In the initial blog post, and once again for like the third time, I haven't seen the whole FAQ yet, Yo-Yo didn't say much about this. I suspect it's going to be mostly to do with lightweight objects and that sort of thing, but it just says instances, which suggests that it may or may not refer to classic object instances, but then again, it may not, because Yo-Yo, you could not have made this any more confusing if you tried. If it does mean classic instances and other things like data structures or whatever, I'm not actually sure how that's going to work unless the whole ID system is overhauled. Because data structures and instance IDs and everything else are just regular numbers that happen to be associated with a structure in memory. And without knowing beforehand, there is no way to know if a variable that contains the value of 5 is just supposed to refer to a number that you can do math and things on, or if it's supposed to refer to the index of a DS list. We'll see about that, I guess. In his video, LazyEye just went completely like, I have no idea. But if I had to place a bet, I'd say it's specifically aimed at lightweight objects, since the section about the new operator says, begin quote, "We will also be providing a delete function that can be used to explicitly garbage collect the lightweight object. And in parentheses, it will otherwise be garbage collected automatically when it is no longer used." End quote. Please, at least maybe don't screw this one up, Yo-Yo. Just please. I've learned to not set my expectations that high. The verdict. I guess it wouldn't be a GameMaker update if tables weren't flipped at some point, but assuming that they get it together between now and the end of the year, it's going to be great. I still use mostly GameMaker Studio 1 as of my recording this video because that's what I'm used to, and I don't really use the room editor anyway because I have problems, but this is most likely going to be what motivates me to finally permanently make the switch. Which means I can join the rest of GameMaker Civilization. Let me know what you think. I think this is going to be a very good update. I don't know exactly how good it's going to be. Like I said, I don't want to set my expectations unreasonably high because this is GameMaker they were talking about. And now if you'll excuse me, I'm going to go fantasize about instance methods for a little while. And pet my rabbit. Say hello, rabbit.